don't know what to talk about. Death or love? Or are they the same? Sometimes I can still hear his voice. Photographs don't even have the same effect on me as his voice did. But he never calls out to me. Not even in my dreams. I always call out to him. A disaster that took thousands of lives and left thousands more devastated. The Chernobyl disaster was a nuclear explosion outside of the town of Paprit, Ukraine on April 26, 1986. The area around Paprit, Ukraine is still uninhabitable to this day. The Chernobyl disaster has produced thousands of true stories, such as that of Lyudmila Inatyanka, who not only lost her husband Vasya, a firefighter sent to put out the flames of Chernobyl, but also lost something much more precious. This is Voices from Chernobyl by Svetlana Alexievich. We were newlyweds and we would still walk down the streets holding hands, and sometimes he'd spin me around and sometimes I'd jump up behind him and say, "I love you." We lived in an apartment above the firehouse where he worked, and we didn't have much, but we had everything that we could ever want, and we were expecting. One night, I was awoken by a flash outside of our window and a big boom, and I went to the window to see what was going on, and Vasya came up behind me and said, "Don't worry, darling, there's been a fire at the reactor. I'll be home in a few hours." He's still not back. At 6, we were supposed to leave to go to his parents' house, but at 7, I got a call saying that he was in a hospital at Moscow. So I got on a plane and I ran around the city asking if anyone would know where a firefighter from Paprit might be, and a short man grabbed my hand and told me he's probably in hospital 6, a hospital that specializes in radiation poisoning. I worked my way up through the levels, and finally I found myself in front of the head of the radiology technicians, and she looked at me and said, "Do you have any children?" I couldn't tell her that I was expecting because then she wouldn't let me see my husband, and so I said, "Yes, a boy and a girl." "Fine, then you don't need to have any more. If you cry, I throw you out. And listen to me, absolutely no touching." I was so excited. The nurses said that they would let me stay in a dorm with them, and I threw open the curtains and that's not my husband. His skin was peeling and was a purple blue. I knew he was dying. I made it my mission to keep his mind on anything but that. Every day, I met a new version of my husband. His face would morph into someone that I'd never seen before. It got so bad that the nurses would send me to do their work instead of them. And there was a little stool by his bed that I would sit on to keep him company. One night, he looked up at me and said,
"Lyudmila, how's our child?"
"Oh, it's doing well, Vasya, it's doing well."
What are you going to name it?"
need to just name it. Why don't we name it together? What do you think we should name?
If it's a boy, Igor. And if it's a girl, Natasha.
Those are beautiful names. I loved him so much. You don't know how much you love something until you see it in pain. I loved him. The next night, I was invited to a funeral of one of his firefighter friends, so I leaned over and said, "I'll be back in a few hours. I just need to get some air." The stars were beautiful that night. They shone like beautiful, brilliant suns, and they gave me some sliver of hope. And when I walked back into the hospital, the nurse stopped me and I asked how he was, and she told me that he died 10 minutes ago. I was by his side for weeks. How could he have died 10 minutes ago? I didn't even get to see him. He died alone, and I didn't even get to see his body before they zipped it up in a bag. The day of his funeral is not one that I like to remember. His parents were there, and my parents were there, and some magistrate from the government was also there. And when we asked if we could take his body home, they responded, "His body belongs to the state and will remain in Moscow." Anytime I want to see my husband, I have to fly a few hours to Moscow. They paid for our plane tickets home, but that was no just compensation for my husband. And on the flight home, I had the strangest dream. Vasya and I were holding hands, walking along a river wearing white, and he looked over and said, "Come here, Natasha, come here, my girl." And there she was, our daughter, about 5 years old, and he caught her and threw her up, and Kat caught her in the air, and everything was right in the world. And then I woke up. A few months later, I went to visit my husband in Moscow. And while I was there, I started going into labor, and some nice gentleman rushed me to the hospital. And a few hours later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, my Natasha. And she was healthy, and the nurses took her away, and a few hours later, they came back and told me that her liver had failed, and that she was dead. And when I asked to see her, they said the same thing. Her body belongs to the state. It doesn't belong to me. What do you mean I can't see my daughter? She's my daughter! She's all that I have left! After a few hours of screaming, they finally gave her to me, but she was in a little box screaming. And I decided to bury her at my husband's feet. She had nothing but a name. She was a lightning rod for my radiation poisoning, and she saved me, and I killed her. My little girl saved me. And I loved her so much, and you can't kill something with love. You just can't love in death. No one likes to hear about death. But I wasn't telling you about death. I was telling you about my loves. Thank you.